Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Education Curriculum Committee meeting. This morning, we have a whole bunch of people with us because, of course, we have a lot of change in our administration since our last meeting. So we have Dr. Mioli, our current Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. We have Dr. Ira Pernick, who is our fresh administrator for curriculum and instruction. At the last Board of Ed meeting, our incoming in the summer Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction was appointed. And of course, we have Dr. Hines with us and the entire committee. And this morning, our subject is early literacy. And for that, we have our administrator for early literacy, Victoria Barcella. And I know this is a hot topic that a lot of people have been asking us to discuss. And so I'm looking forward to hearing it. And I know the public is too, and I'm expecting we'll have a bunch of questions this morning. With that, am I handing it over to you or to Dr. Mioli? Dr. Mioli?
Yeah, I'll just do a quick, while Dr. Barcella gets the PowerPoint up. Those of you who have watched these before know that I like to start off by defining what we're talking about. So it seems pretty straightforward, but when we're talking about early literacy, we're going to be talking about pre-K through mostly third grade today. And literacy, and there is a slide here, Dr. Barcella will be getting into detail on really the four parameters of literacy: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. But we're going to be honing in on what you would expect, writing and mostly reading, because especially in the early years, reading is really the linchpin for everything in terms of instruction and education. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Barcella.
Okay, good morning. Share, let me make sure everyone can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So good morning, I'm Victoria Barcella, and today I'm here to talk to you about early literacy. Like Dr. Mioli said, I'm going to focus my presentation on grades pre-K to 3 with an emphasis on reading and writing. So what is early literacy? In 2017, New York State introduced the Next Gen Learning Standards. And as of September 2022, all school districts need to be fully implemented with the standards. Luckily in Port Washington, we're well ahead of the game. So New York State developed what they call anchor standards. And anchor standards are basically a set of skills that they would like a high school graduate to have in order to be ready for the workforce or post-secondary education. The anchor standards are reading, writing, listening, speaking, and language. So many of us have heard of the fundamentals of reading or the 5 pillars of reading. These 5 aspects work together to create skilled readers. So I'm going to go through some of the aspects of reading. Some of them are a little confusing. Phonemic awareness and phonics, many people confuse. So I'm here to explain the difference. So phonemic awareness is the ability to hear and manipulate the smallest units of sound called phonemes. So English is written using the alphabetic system, meaning every letter corresponds to a sound, which is obvious. But in other languages, characters represent whole syllables or even words. So students need an awareness of phonemes before they can make sense of the words on the page. And studies have shown that phonemic awareness is one of the best early indicators of a student's reading potential. Phonics. Phonics is basically the connection between sounds and letter symbols. So putting those sounds together to form a word, that's phonics. Phonics is the written language where phonemic awareness is the hearing and the sounds of the language. So if you were to walk into a K1 classroom, you wouldn't see a lot of writing going on with phonemic awareness. A lot of it would be oral and auditory learning. Where phonics, you would see writing going on. Vocabulary. So in order for us to read words, we first have to understand them and know them. As children become stronger readers, they connect their oral vocabulary to their reading vocabulary. And daily, students are always adding new words to their vocabulary. Fluency. Fluency is the ability to read accurately and quickly. So fluency actually requires children to combine and use multiple reading skills together at the same time. And fluency is always tied to comprehension. So comprehension, that's basically the reason why we read. It's more than just understanding the words. For children, it's using their prior knowledge to develop meaning. It also involves the other four: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, and vocabulary. But it requires active engagement and thinking and asking questions and summarizing as the student's reading. If you think about your own reading, as you're reading silently to yourself, you're making questions and connections in your head from your prior experience or what the characters are feeling. So that's exactly what the children are doing at the same time. The importance of reading. So one of the most important reasons why children should be reading by 3rd grade is because the focus shifts from learning how to read to reading to learn. Now, before the Next Gen and Common Core standards, most of what children were exposed to was fiction. And that was another problem going into 3rd grade, is this exposure to nonfiction texts. So now with the Next Gen learning standards, it's pretty much 50-50. They're exposed to 50% being fiction and 50% being nonfiction in the elementary grades. So in the last 20 years, many changes have occurred in reading. Researchers and educators are looking at the gaps that exist between certain subgroups, just like we did on our last curriculum meeting. We looked at students with disabilities, English language learners, and some researchers are also looking at minority students and low socioeconomic students so that they close that gap. Many studies have also shown that prevention of reading failure is much more productive than remediation of reading failure. So in Port Washington, we developed a portrait of a graduate. When looking at some of the lifelong practices of readers and writers that came straight from New York State, we can see a direct connection to our portrait of a graduate. For example, one reading practice is to read often from a wide range of global and diverse text. In Port Washington, in our elementary classrooms and libraries, teachers purchased culturally diverse text, allowing students to explore books by someone who may or may not look like them, or may not share the same culture or background as them. Research-based instruction in reading. So if you walk into any of our classrooms, there are going to be many different types of reading instruction that teachers provide. This typically takes place through the workshop model. If you're familiar with the I do, we do, you do framework, which I like to refer to as the gradual release. So some reading strategies include shared reading, guided reading, interactive read aloud, and independent reading. Very similar to reading, writing follows the same workshop model: shared writing, interactive writing, guided writing, and independent writing. So what does research say about best practices in reading? So there are some key topics that come up on many different studies about what's best practices in reading. They are to incorporate systematic, direct instruction of phonics and phonemic awareness in the lower grades, incorporate differentiation through whole and small group instruction, expand time on reading. So research suggests between 90 and 120 minutes spent on reading and writing throughout the day. So if you look at your classroom time throughout the day, 90 to 120 minutes, that's a lot of time just to be dedicated to reading and writing. But the way that you could fit that in is by incorporating it into your social studies, into your science. So maybe your science lesson, you could use that text in your shared reading. So you're hitting both subjects at the same time. Another practice is give students time to practice skills. Once the skill is taught to the students, they need time to practice that skill. Okay, so what does good reading instruction look like in the classroom? So effective reading instruction encompasses a wide range of teaching practices that provide support to different learners. So these pictures that I'm showing you represent the workshop model. So for instance, in the first picture, the teacher is holding up a book and doing a whole class lesson. So that teacher is going to be teaching skills to multiple different learners. From there, the students will break up into literacy centers. Students will be practicing skills and they're engaged, whether it's by themselves or with others, and they're practicing the skill that the teacher had taught. While the students are in literacy centers, the last picture on the bottom shows the teacher pulling a small group of students. And what that teacher is doing, it appears to be guided reading in this picture. That teacher is working on the direct application of skills based on the data that that teacher took. So for instance, she might be teaching a lesson on high frequency words and fluency. So during that lesson, she will target certain high frequency words and fluency as her teaching strategy. So how are different reading abilities addressed? This is addressed through the RTI process and Tier 1 instruction. So I'm going to go through all the tiers on a slide that comes up. But first, right now, I'm just going to talk about Tier 1 instruction. So within Tier 1, students receive research-based instruction, including direct, explicit, systematic teaching of skills. Differentiation is provided based on students' needs. Teachers provide opportunities, like I showed you before during the literacy centers, to apply those skills and practice it. And they also progress monitor students. So I'm going to explain to you what progress monitoring is. Let me see if I have a slide here. No, okay. So progress monitoring, what progress monitoring does is it tracks students over time. Teachers are making data-based instructional decisions. They are meeting students where they are and providing instruction. So in grades K to 2, we like to see 6 to 8 weeks of intervention put in place or progress monitoring before we go and change that intervention, because again, students need time to practice. Research says that students who have persistent academic needs require 10 times more practice than their typical peers at their instructional level. So an example of progress monitoring might be taking a small group and doing a guided reading. So how do we monitor student growth in reading? So there's all different ways that you could progress monitor student growth. One is through our NWEA assessment, which we give 3 times a year. And remember, that's a national, actually an international assessment, but it's nationally normed. Another way to monitor student growth is through small group instruction and differentiating our instruction. An additional way is formative assessments. So formative assessments would be like quizzes, observations, homework, classwork. So how I like to think of formative assessments is it's continuous, it's ongoing, where summative assessments, those usually happen at the end. So an example of a summative assessment could be our state tests or the end of unit assessments on a unit that the teacher has taught.
Dr. Borsella, before you go on,
Yep.
I just want to make a clarification. If we can go back 2 slides, I just want anybody who isn't familiar with the term Tier 1 to understand that, Tier 1 basically represents the classroom, the classroom teacher at the elementary level teaching all of the students in front of them at the same time. So that would be, 80 to 90% of your students are going to have their needs met in reading and writing in the classroom under Tier 1. And so when Dr. Borsella gave you the example of what that would look like in the classroom, that's what she was talking about. And these are some ways actually to differentiate what she was talking about with those various learning centers and that type of thing. And then in the next slide, again, we're talking about the regular classroom. Every student gets is assessed on the NWA in reading and in math. I think any elementary parent knows that 3 times a year at the elementary level. And then again, from there, we identify students who may need extra help. And then we get into the other 2 tiers, which I won't give away. I'll let Dr. Borsella give you that now. Thanks.
So how do we intervene before 3rd grade? By ensuring we have a strong RTI framework. So in Port Washington, we actually have a very strong RTI framework that's based on student data. It encompasses increasing levels or tiers. It includes research-based instruction and progress monitoring. And I just want to remind everybody that the purpose of RTI is to identify a struggling learner and intervene prior to a special ed referral. It has nothing to do with special ed. So RTI is basically intervention in Tier 1, in Tier 2, in Tier 3. So it's increasing levels of intervention. And our last resort might be a special education referral. Okay, so here's the framework that I was talking about. So when a child moves through the tiers, what the difference in each tier is the intensity and amount of support, as well as the size of the grouping. So if we look at Tier 1, like Dr. Mioli said, is every single teacher in the classroom is instructing in Tier 1. So what Tier 1 means is that the teacher is using a core curriculum, instructing at differentiated levels, doing that whole group, as well as progress monitoring students. Now, within Tier 1, teachers know, oh, okay, this student needs some extra help with this skill, and this student is well beyond where they should be. So that's also where the teacher can differentiate and enrich the student within Tier 1, that's within the classroom. So we use small group instruction. Some of our progress monitoring tools are Freckle, LLI, running records. These are some terms that you might have heard come up in your parent conferences. So let's say in Tier 1, your child needs some extra assistance with something. So your child might go to a Tier 2. So what happens in Tier 2 is your child is going to get small group instruction, not only by the classroom teacher, but it also might be by a specialist, meaning an AIS reading teacher or an AIS math teacher. And your child might be seen 2 to 4 times a week. They could be pulled out of the classroom or pushed into the classroom and assist within the classroom. Typically, it's 30 minutes, but it could be 20 minutes depending on the group and the needs. So within Tier 2, one of the most important aspects is to progress monitor the student. Because if a child is not responding to an intervention, for instance, that the reading staff is giving them, we want to learn why. Why is this child not making progress if 6 to 8 weeks went by and we're putting this intervention in place? So we also have to look at what type of change that we might need. So if the child is making progress, you can see right at the bottom, if the child does make progress, they go right back into the classroom, and then they get their instruction through Tier 1 again with the classroom teacher. So if a child is not making progress here within Tier 2, what we're going to do is I'm going to explain to you right now what data-based decision-making is. So for example, if we are taking a running record, knowing that a child was able to read 65 out of 80 words correctly isn't particularly useful to figure out why a child is not making progress. What we can do is when you take a running record, that means the child is orally reading and the teacher is ticking off the words that the child is saying correctly and writing down the words that the child is not saying correctly. So we can look at the types of errors a child is making and hypothesize why. So for instance, if we're looking at oral reading fluency, is the child making errors due to their understanding of phonics? Is the child making semantic errors? Are they reading accurately, or is their reading laborious? All these kinds of patterns will tell the teacher about the different type of intervention that might be needed. So if a child is not making progress within tier 2, so say 6 to 8 weeks went by, we put one intervention in place, now we tried a different strategy, we put that in place, and the student still is not making progress, then the student might go into what's called tier 3. So tier 3 is really the most intensive intervention you can get. Typically, it's 5 times a week, usually 30 minutes. And the group of children is going to be much smaller. So for instance, in tier 2, a teacher might see 6 students. In tier 3, it's typically 1 or 2 students per teacher. And it's extremely individualized. And the teacher is frequently progress monitoring that student. And what I mean by frequent is almost every time that teacher pulls the child and works with that child, the teacher is progress monitoring that child. So if the student does make progress, then we return the student back to tier 2. If the child's in tier 3, we don't want to just go right back to tier 1 because the child might still need some support, but maybe just not 5 days a week. The student might be able to go back to 2 to 3 times a week. So one strategy that teachers use here, program that we use, is called reading recovery. And I'm going to explain that, and you'll see that reading recovery is one of our most intensive interventions that we can give.
Victoria, before you go on again, I'm sorry, I just want to revisit a couple of those things because there's a lot of information here. And again, I'm just going to assume that there may be a couple of people watching at least who just need to unpack a little. I'll give you a chance to take a breath too.
Oh, thank you. I'll drink some water.
So again, tier 1 is the regular classroom, and that universal screener at the top is what Dr. Borsella was talking about earlier, that the NWEA, the map, which is given 3 times a year. So every child in their tier 1 classroom gets the NWEA. And then what those scores give us are very specific skills. I'm not going to ask her to go back to that slide, but you remember the 5 pillars at the very beginning. So it's not like students, fail the test or anything like that. It identifies particular weaknesses. And so that weakness, so it might be in phonics, or it might be in vocabulary or something like that. And then the teacher then in tier 2, which is still for the most part in the classroom, the teacher takes students who are identified by that universal screener and gives them extra help, extra assistance, mostly in the classroom on a specific skill, usually on one specific skill. It could be more than that, but it's a very detailed and very kind of precise procedure. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. And then most of the time, and again, 80 to 90% get their needs met in tier 1. There's only usually 10 to 15% of students who have their needs met in tier 2 or need to go to tier 2 to have their needs met. And most of the time, they're given instruction, and the progress monitoring is not the instruction. That's the assessment, but we give them extra instruction, and then we assess are they back in with the mainstream, and if so, we put them back in, and if not, then they go to tier 3. So I just wanted to kind of reconnect a bunch of those slides together. Okay, and then tier 3 would be mostly out of the classroom, right? Almost entirely.
Yep.
Thank you.
So in Port Washington, right on our website, we have our response to intervention plan. And the types of progress monitoring tools that we use all came from our teachers. And these are the types of interventions that they use in the classroom as well as outside the classroom. So you could see some of the interventions are guided reading groups, LLI, which is leveled literacy intervention, reading A to Z. In tier 2, we also have LLI and running records. So we put a complication of these together for our teachers. So prior to going to a tier 2, we have something called an instructional support team. So what an instructional support team is, it's basically a team of colleagues, and the teacher can meet with these colleagues and share ideas and strategies about what has or has not worked in terms of intervention in the classroom. So say a teacher is having difficulty with one student in phonics, and she pulled out all the strategies that she knows how to do. Well, she might go to this IST, which we like to call instructional support team, and say, I think, I need some more strategies to use. And what this team is, it's specialists on this team. So there could be a counselor, there could be a reading teacher, there could be a speech teacher. And the team will provide a structured process and design a student intervention and support for the teacher. So here is an example of our form. And if you can see here, it's extremely detailed, and it really speaks to the work that went into this form when the group meets together. Now, once this form is filled out, the teacher might go back and implement some of the strategies that the team has suggested. So once that is implemented, say those strategies don't work, the teacher might come back to the IST team, and then that is when a tier 2 intervention specialist might come in and then pull the student for additional support. So I told you I was going to explain what reading recovery was. Reading recovery is our tier 3. Remember, it's in tier 3. It's our most intensive intervention that we can get. And it's used with our first graders. It's typically at least 20 weeks, 5 days a week of 30-minute lessons, one-on-one. It's highly structured, and the teacher is continually taking data during a reading recovery lesson. If you've ever gone in and seen a reading recovery lesson, you would be amazed by the amount of activities the teacher can get through in a short amount of time. And again, it's highly individualized, so it's based on that learner. So how are we doing here in Port Washington? So here are our results from what I like to say pre-pandemic, when we were somewhat stable and normal. So in kindergarten, 72% of our kindergarten students were able to meet benchmark on the NWEA, meaning they were where they should be. First grade, 77%. Second grade, 86%, and in third grade, 71%. So what are we doing well in Port? We're doing a lot of things well, otherwise we wouldn't have the scores we have. So this year, our reading staff implemented intervention in kindergarten, and they picked a program that's grounded in the science of reading, and they're using that in all 5 elementary schools with our kindergarten students that are struggling with phonics and phonemic awareness. We also implement a targeted pre-K program here that's our most at-risk students, and they're coming in and being exposed to language and a research-based curriculum. Again, we assess students 3 times a year using the NWEA. Teachers differentiate instruction in both small and whole group. Teachers and our AIS, meaning academic intervention support staff, are progress monitoring students to make sure students are where they should be and the intervention is working that they're using. We're also implementing a uniform writing curriculum in grades K to 6. This year, actually, our last 6th grade unit will be written. We are beginning to create curriculum maps to look at gaps and best practices that we used across the district. We've developed a portrait of a graduate, so we know in pre-K where we want our 12th grader to come out and the skills that we want our 12th grader to have. We also utilize one-to-one devices in our district, which helps us develop literacy skills outside of school as well as in school. So what could we take a deeper dive into? What could we look at a little more closely? Maybe the expansion of direct instruction in phonics and phonemic awareness in grades K to 2, the implementation of a common reading curriculum in grades K to 2, also training our AIS staff, meaning our reading support staff, in the use of other programs such as Wilson for students who are not reading by 3rd grade, and increase of small group work and time spent on reading within the classroom. And now we're up to questions. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much for that. Before I open it up further, I know a hot question for the Board of Ed and probably for the public too is always, this looks fantastic. It looks like the ideal. Is this where we're at for every child K to 3? Are there differences by building? Or is this the ideal and this is where it is in some of the places and we're working on expanding and making sure it reaches everybody? What's the status of this?
So the results that I gave you on the NWEA, that was district-wide, meaning all 5 elementary schools. So for kindergarten, I want to go back to my notes, but I believe it was 72% of our students were meeting benchmark. That's fabulous. Could it be better? Absolutely. I would love to see that up to at least 80%. So I would say that on each one of the categories there, kindergarten, 1st grade, I believe 2nd grade was already at 86%. So they already met what my benchmark would be. And second grade, I believe, no, was it 3rd grade went down a little bit. So I would like to see all of those percentiles up to 80%. And that is district-wide in all 5 elementary schools.
So I mean, though, not just the numbers, which I understand are district-wide, but in terms of the structure you described of what happens at the various tiers and how the children are being assessed and taught in the classroom, is that Port Washington wide? This is what it should look like at this point in every classroom, K to 3?
Correct.
Okay, great. And then second question to that, I know prior to you joining Port Washington, we didn't have an administrator for early literacy in Port Washington.
Correct.
Can you tell us a little bit, so the board has this framework, has this been an evolution to get to this point? Were we in a different place when you first arrived here? And yes. Am I right in assuming the things that you just put on as the deeper dive is the direction you're heading us in? So I guess you just give us a little bit more about where we came from.
Okay, so prior to me coming, we just started writing a curriculum. We also, for grades K to 2, we made something called reading outcomes, which are what I would like to see every kindergarten student, whether you come out of classroom A or classroom B's teacher, every kindergarten student at the end of the year should have these skills. Now, how a teacher gets to those skills, that is really irrelevant. If they want to use this book or that book, that doesn't matter to me, as long as the students coming out of each grade level have these skills. That's where we give our teachers the latitude to choose what they'd like to do. Since I've been here, we did implement now up to 6th grade, a K to 6 writing curriculum. We have K to 2 reading outcomes. We are moving forward, looking at curriculum mapping, and I'm starting to notice that teachers would like more phonics and phonemic awareness in the younger grades. So we're also doing literacy centers now. So I've gone into many classrooms and modeled, how to use literacy centers. It's very difficult when you have 25 or 22 5-year-olds. Like, what are they supposed to be doing when you pull a group of 5 children? So that's also something that we've implemented across the district.
Yeah, I want to jump in here too, because Dr. Borsell is being a little self-effacing here as well. One term that you haven't heard yet, which we probably should have put in, is professional development, and that's been her biggest role in terms of working with teachers. I know when I was at Sousa, I asked her to work with me in terms of that was not a particularly strong area of knowledge for me, and a number of teachers, who were asking for help or not, in terms of a lot of the things that you just saw, because there are lots of varying abilities among students, and it is a critical skill. It's why we're talking about it today. And she did, Dr. Borsella did give you 1 or 2 statistics at the beginning of how critical it is, and especially in the very early years. So, and actually, this, but I don't know how many of our audience do. We actually had 2 literacy people. And so Dr. Borsella has grown into a pre-K to 6 role. And that's, I'll give her credit also, one of the reasons why we've gotten the writing program up through and including 6th grade this year. So that's been a big part of the evolution, I'll say, of reading and writing instruction and early literacy.
I see I have a couple hands up. Mr. Smith and Ms. Malconi, and I actually don't know which one of you was first.
It was Mr. Smith.
Okay. Go ahead.
I was just quick to the trigger, so it's up to you, Nan, if you want to go first.
Be my guest.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Borsella and Dr. Mioli, for that presentation. It was actually really helpful to have all of that context to start with, so we appreciate it. Rachel, I have a couple of questions. Should I just go through all of them rather than going back and forth?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, okay. So my first question is, I guess, a little bit specific and really just for our information and education. We've had a couple of emails from parents in the time that I've been on the board purporting to be, to have expertise in literacy, and not a lot, maybe 1 or 2, who particularly called out reading recovery as not a great program. And I don't know much about it, so I had Googled about it a little bit, and it does seem like there's very mixed reviews. People either seem to love it or hate it, and those who hate it, the complaint seems to be that it's geared towards like contextual learning, and some, I guess, consider that kind of cheating as opposed to like going back to basics on phonics. I'm wondering if there's any, like, what your feeling is on that, and like how we selected that program and why we use it. I'm not implying that any of that is true. I'm just curious so that we know how to respond to people in the future if it's brought up.
So reading recovery was here before I came here, and it's a program that's been in the district for, I think, as long as Dr. Mioli's been here, correct, Dr. Mioli?
Yes, since the dinosaurs, yeah.
So I think one of the issues that I'm hearing you say is it's geared towards contextual learning. They do teach phonics skills during reading recovery. I mean, most of it is phonics before it's fluency of reading. So I actually just went in and observed a reading recovery lesson, and the majority of it was working with words. And as I explained before, that's really what phonics is. And it is highly individualized. Would you like to add anything else, Dr. Mioli?
Sure. I was gonna
Okay.
I was gonna jump in and save you on this one. So I mean, it won't surprise you to hear that that there are Dr. Borsella. I'm a bigger fan of reading recovery than Dr. Borsella is, mostly because my daughter went through it, and it, without over dramatizing, changed, her life, her educational life. So there are, but you will you won't be surprised to hear that there are lots of opinions about just about everything in education. And I think some of those criticisms are valid. It's a program that does have a high cost value because it's one-on-one, it's 5 days a week. And it does not reach every student. It's built for the bottom 20% in a given population, but not every student in that bottom 20% can be well served with reading recovery. And again, I'm out of my field here, but I've been around the block a few times. So I think the things that you're hearing and seeing are valid. The question is, as always, what are we, what else do we use instead or in addition to? And I think that's another strength that Dr. Borsella has brought here. We did not show you, she showed you a list of some things that are happening in the classroom, but she didn't go through them. But we have leveled literacy instruction, LLI, you may hear that, which is being used in many, many classrooms as a tier 1 and a tier 2 intervention. And there are lots of electronic things. And again, I want to highlight that. The board knows this, but those of you at home probably haven't heard me say it anywhere near as many times, that in addition to saving us during the pandemic, all of the funds that we spent on the one-to-one initiative have really helped in the classroom because it's enabled us to put individual screens in front of kids in the classroom now that we're back in person, and to individualize instruction in the classroom in lots of ways that we could never do before. So that's the long version. I think the short version is that there will always be a debate about all of these programs. We could talk about Wilson, we could talk about, there's literally scores of different ways to approach this. I think one of the strengths of Fort Washington is that we do have a breadth of different kinds of programs that different teachers use. And although reading recovery is institutionally bound, that's also one of the things that Dr. Borsella talked about looking at into a deeper dive. Consistency and having the ability to use, multiple programs is that yin and yang here. So I don't know if that helped answer your question or not.
I have more questions from that answer. And my biggest takeaway from that was that you like it more than Dr. Borsella does. So it tells me that there is definitely, it's a little bit alarming to me that our director of literacy doesn't love the program that we're using. Dr. Hines, go ahead. It's your.
Thanks, Adam. Good morning, everybody. So I've seen reading recovery in many school districts. It's been around for a long time. And like, Dr. Muley said, there is a debate about it. I think the question is, what happens after this intervention with our kids and their success rate? And that's the question I've always asked about any program. So once this intervention, and it is a real intervention, how successful are they post it, not just 1 year later, but 2, 3, or 4 years later? And that's the data that I've always wanted to look at. And in my estimation, what I've seen is that those students are successful. It brings them where we want them to be, or maybe just short of where we want them to be longitudinally. That to me is the most important thing. And I think, as Dr. Muley said too, is that, there's a lot of things that we have in the bag of tricks as far as trying to support kids. And I think this is just one of them. I won't say the problem. I think the concern for some is it is very cost intensive. So we're talking about very specific as far as that type of intervention. But what I've seen, for whatever it's worth, I've seen it be successful longitudinally, which is important.
Got it. Okay. I'll skip to my next question. I think that's clear. What are we doing in terms of connecting to home, especially for students who have been identified as needing, I guess, intervention beyond the typical classroom setting? Are we doing it in a consistent way? Are we making sure that parents have their concerns heard? Are we making sure that parents are supporting their student at home and being told how to support their children at home? And I guess question 2 off of that, once you answer it, is, are we able to differentiate between students whose parents are either incapable or unwilling to give support at home, and making sure that they're getting an even playing field to the kids who are able to get the support at home?
So I can tell you, we do have a consistent letter that goes home throughout all our AIS staff. So if your child is going to be pulled out of the classroom, or if a support is going to be pushed into the classroom, there is a uniform letter, I know because I made it with the teachers, that goes home, and the parent needs to sign it in order for us to intervene. And your second questions were, what at home can parents do?
Yeah, I guess, like, is there once that letter goes, are there updates? Is there feedback? Are parents able to ask questions? Like, are the teachers pushing to try to there's the district trying to push into the home to get support at home, or is it more like kind of like I'm trying to understand if it's like a wall where it's happening in the school, or if we're trying to connect with the families and have it be like an ecosystem.
Well, absolutely, we'd be connecting at home. So I know I could speak to the reading staff because that's who I supervise. They contact the parents. They sit through parent-teacher conferences. They also have their own conference with the parents, in addition to sending home progress reports. And if a phone call needs to be made or a parent has a concern, absolutely. That letter that goes home has the teacher's email, name, and phone number on it. So the parent could at any time contact the reading staff. And I know my reading staff has reached out to some parents. And then your last one was, are we able to differentiate? I didn't get the last question.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, are we able to identify students who are getting, Dr. Hines, I see you have your hand raised. Is that in regard to my question? Okay, no, I was trying to understand if like students who are able to get support at home versus students who are not able to get support at home, if that is identified, and if those students are differentiated between, based on what resources they have outside of the buildings.
So are you referring to maybe a student that might be an ELL learner and their parents?
As one example. Yeah.
Okay,
sure.
So we do have, one example is we do have ENL teachers that reach out. I know there are parent workshops done continually throughout ENL. In our pre-K, we do give workshops in terms of what can parents do at home. I know the teachers reach out and give, strategies that parents could use at home, even as simple as, how do I help my child with homework, or, setting up a routine in the morning for your children. So parents, teachers definitely reach out, and if they need it translated in a second language. So for instance, when we give our pre-K presentation about how to prepare for kindergarten, we have 2 different sessions. One is in English and one is in Spanish. So we're definitely continually reaching out to parents, and whatever they need. We have community resources that they can use.
Got it. Great. Okay. And I have 2 more questions. Sorry, Rachel. They'll be quick. The first one is on the chart you showed about the NWEA scores.
Yes.
I noticed it was the percentages were climbing kindergarten, first, second, and then there was a sharp drop in 3rd grade. Mm-hmm. Is that what's going on there?
So that's one of the reasons our lowest percent, I believe, was in kindergarten. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to intervene in kindergarten, because a lot of the research says that we can actually close the reading gap at the end of kindergarten. So intervening early is productive. So I think it was 71 or 72, and then it went up to 86. Well, that's where that 3rd grade, that shift in learning happens. So the students are no longer learning how to read, learning how to decode. They have to read nonfiction text and understand it. So they're no longer learning to read. They have to read information to learn. So what we can do to improve that is expose children to more nonfiction text in the lower grades. Look at the errors that children are making, so we could really individualize instruction. Now, those numbers are pretty good, but like I said, can they be better? Absolutely. My opinion is I would like to see at least everyone at 80%, if not better.
Got it. So
Can
what
I
is
just
it
partially answer that too, real quick?
Yeah.
I just
Okay.
want to make sure, because we went into this in great detail in the last presentation. What we would normally show you would be, over several years, because those are different
Right.
kids. So we don't know what's going on there, is really the answer to your question. We have a lot of pieces, and Dr. Borsella just gave you some of them, but they're different kids, and they're without a longitudinal view. That's really what helps us answer that.
And are we tracking that for the future so that maybe in 3 years we can look at these kindergartners and see that chart?
So we can do that, although
Yeah.
I don't know what year would be the best year to start, because 1920 we were in the middle of
Right.
shut down, and then 2021 we're still in a pandemic. My guess would be maybe start looking at them in September when it's a typical year again. Students just started being able to work in groups again and communicate. So I think we'd have to maybe wait until 2022 to start looking at the data.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. But we should probably pick one and start soon, just so,
Correct.
Okay. And then my last question, and then I'll give up the mic. I might have missed this because I actually had to step away for a minute or two during the presentation, but it looked like a lot of what we were seeing today was about intervention. Do we have a standard curriculum for literacy for kids who don't need intervention, just general? Like, are we following something? And I know this might be an antiquated term, but something like BASIL, like a reading a literacy curriculum. And if not, is that something we're looking at? Dr. Muley, looking at you with the curriculum mapping, just as part of the board goals of consistency. I'm wondering if this falls under that.
Go ahead,
So-
Dr. Muley.
Okay, so I just need to differentiate, as I do all the time, between curriculum and program and standards. Dr. Borsella started off with standards and anchor standards. So we had curriculum maps here for a very long time, and we are reestablishing them. And again, both the discussion, the verb curriculum mapping, and having the curriculum maps both parts are really important. And so we're reestablishing those pieces for more consistency. I think we have not been as consistent as we should be, which is why Dr. Hines and I made that, something that we wanted to start right away in terms of the mapping. In terms of a program, you saw some instances where Dr. Borsella has brought in specific programs for specific grade levels, not one program for the whole district for, pre-K to 8 or whatever. And I think that kind of approach has been successful, and we will continue to follow.
Okay, so just follow up, Dr. Muley. Because I might have misunderstood. Are we using those programs for the entire district, or are they specific interventions at different tiers?
The ones that Dr. Borsella was speaking about were at the pre-K level, which is just pre-K, and then at the elementary level, they're all the kindergartens, right, Dr. Borsella?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And which program is that? Sorry.
It's called Really Great Reading. It's based on the science of reading.
Right.
We just implemented it this year because we just started intervention in kindergarten this year, where kindergarten students get pulled out of the classroom for phonics and phonemic awareness support.
Oh no, so that's where I'm sorry, I'm being dense. I'm trying to understand if we have a program we're using across the district for the kids who aren't being pulled out.
No, we don't have one particular program in each school or across the district. No, we do not.
Okay. And is that good or bad?
Both.
Okay.
It's a yin and a yang. In districts that have a consistent, if we were to start a consistent program in 2 years, first of all, you need a lot of professional development to roll it out. But there definitely would be more consistency. But all those lists that you saw earlier of the kinds of materials and assessments that teachers use, I wouldn't say they would go away, but they'd be restricted, because you'd be paying a lot of money for a program, and you'd want to use those materials and those assessments as much as you can, and you'd have less resources to purchase and use all those other ones that teachers choose to use instead. So it really is both. It's really a yin and a yang.
Okay.
And
Dr. Hines, can I put you on the spot to answer that question also? I'm really curious.
Sure. No, this is the quintessential. Do we prescribe something and everyone follows that prescription? Or do we have a set of non-negotiable exit outcomes as far as skills that we allow the teachers to have the flexibility to bring resources in that are still consistent within the school district? I've worked in both. Here is very different where I was before, where there was a prescribed, and as you said, Adam, basal program. And I agree with what Dave's saying. There are pros and cons to it. So I think, if philosophically, it seems that there are certain things I believe we can tighten up from a fidelity standpoint, from a consistency standpoint. I wouldn't recommend going to a prescription, like for a math program, right? We have a math program that is prescribed that's universal through all of our elementary schools. I think because of the science and art of reading and writing and listening and speaking, I think having that flexibility, but still looking at some more of the consistency concerns that we have, where the curriculum mapping comes in. Ultimately, in the end, when the kids leave, let's say third grade, I'll just use third grade, there should be a common set of expectations as far as exit outcomes, right? As far as skills that are non-negotiable, whether it's at a proficiency level or whether it's at a mastery level. How the teacher gets there, I think, is where we have to focus on as far as supporting our teachers. So that's where I would be. It's a balance. I would say it's a balance between the two, and for us to focus on where that balance is.
And
it seems like a conversation that we have a lot, and that you all as administrators are constantly dealing with in every area, right? Because what Adam's really asking about is this interplay between teacher freedom and consistency, and how do you strike that balance? If I'm understanding, though, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Dr. Hines, maybe where we're heading is that there's a toolbox that has a lot of choice in it.
Yep.
And that teachers get to pick from that toolbox, but we know what the outcomes are. We know what the skills are. It's not just teach kids to read, do it however you want.
That's right.
There's a little bit more prescription, but with a lot of freedom. Is that the direction that we're heading in?
It is. So think of it this way. I'm really paring it down here. We all want to get to Paris, right? That's the destination. How you get to Paris is up to you. However, there are certain non-negotiable things as you go along this journey that you need to make sure that you fulfill. And so getting to the destination of Paris means, for me, again, using second grade, fourth grade, we have a common set of understanding as far as skill sets we want students to exit with in reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And so again, having that flexibility. So, the term academic freedom, there's no freedom as far as where kids end up. We want kids to end up in a certain place. The freedom is where the teacher uses certain tools at their discretion because they're professionals and we've trained them for that. That's the way I would look at this.
Got it. Okay.
If I may, because this has been a running thing for me forever. I think Dr. Hines, we should take that clip out and put it on the website. I think you just defined perfectly the difference between curriculum and instruction. Curriculum are those non-negotiables. Curriculum literally means a path of little steps. What Dr. Hines was just talking about, how do we get to Paris? There's lots of little steps that we can take in lots of little directions to get there. But the question is, how do we make sure everybody gets there? And that's where the instruction comes in. That's where your programs come in. That's where a conscripted program can help with consistency, but can also limit teacher choice. And so I think we're heading in exactly the right direction with focusing on curriculum maps, those non-negotiables. And by the way, and I need to throw this in this commercial too, we're looking at it mostly so that we can look at it in terms of our new portrait of a graduate. Not only where are we now, but where do we want to be, and how do we adjust what we're doing in the classroom in the curriculum sense to help us get to those competencies, many of which we have not held ourselves responsible for in terms of having students graduate with them, like life skills, in an explicit way. So curriculum is critical. Instruction is critical, but they're very different.
I'm good, Rachel.
Okay.
Thanks. For the gift of Nick.
Let's see, Miss Malconian, I believe you're next.
Thank you. I'm glad you had a lot of questions, Adam, because I have a page full here. So cut me off whenever you feel I've completely abused my rights here. Let's do easy ones first. Well, first of all, thank you. This was very informative. Let's do an easy one. The writing program that you were describing, is that the program that was started by Dr. Westervelt through Teachers College? Okay.
It's not through Teachers College. It was started through an outside consultant. And it's based off of the philosophy of Teachers College.
Okay. All right. That's what I thought. Okay. So see, easy one. Let's try easy again. When you describe the toolbox, who decides what's in the toolbox? Who with expertise is providing the tools and the programming that are in that box? Where does that come from?
So mainly it comes from the teachers. And I have to tell you, I've been in both situations. I started teaching, I can't believe I'm going to say this, 25 years ago, where we did not have a scripted program, but we did have a set of outcomes that, we had to abide by. And I've also been in a district where we had to implement a scripted program. Is any program perfect? Absolutely not. You're always going to have to supplement, whether it be guided reading levels or phonics or, no matter what it is, you're always going to have to supplement in a program because no child fits each program because you have to individualize and differentiate your instruction. So for instance, I did pilot a few programs. I liked one because they had great guided reading resources, but was very, very low in phonics. Another program was very heavy in phonics and phonemic awareness, but their guided reading wasn't so great. So what I did was I took both programs and I tried to combine them together. I used guided reading from one, and I used, the phonics and phonemic awareness from another. But that's just part of it. What we're looking at is a whole balanced literacy approach and the workshop model. And the toolbox. Okay, so again, I've worked with many different programs, so I can tell teachers that, for instance, a Journeys program isn't heavy in phonics, where a Wonders program might be. Journeys has great guided reading. So I have used different programs before, and it's really trial and error. You have to look at it. You have to look at the program. You have to implement it and see if it works. But the teachers usually pick the programs.
Okay, thank you. So as the district expert in literacy, if it's not reading recovery is your favorite, what would you rather see?
So it's not that it's not my favorite. What concerns me is it's very individualized, and we're using our best resources in the district for literacy on a very small population of students. Does it work? Of course. I mean, you're getting one-on-one tutoring, 5 times a week for 30 minutes. So would I say I want to take it away? I'm not sure I would say that, but I would like to see, instead of working one-on-one, maybe, 4 or 5 children, maybe meet the needs of more children. And that's where we go into the, cost effectiveness of it and all of that. Because we're literally taking our best resources in the district for a very small population for a lot of time.
So part of my understanding of the criticism of reading recovery is that the students show great progress in first grade, but then there isn't a lot of follow-through success, perhaps second and third, and those same students are still on the vulnerable side or on the cusp of needing service again. Are you seeing that in our students here?
So yes, so for instance, if you're at your bottom 20% and you have to get intervention, let's say in first grade, at the end of first grade, you may or may not be meeting that benchmark. Going forward for second grade, you wouldn't want to just drop the child and give the child no intervention at all. Of course, you need to follow up and make sure that the child is still doing okay and on benchmark. Sometimes our lowest 20% doesn't get to where they need to be, regardless of the intervention we're giving them, and they still need continuous support. So if you think about it, it's not like a one and done. It's a child and they're developing and they're going to need support throughout, you know, their time in elementary school. Now, whether it be they're meeting benchmark by second or third grade, wonderful. If not, then we continue to give them support.
So that was my second question. Wanting all of our students to get to 80% achieving benchmark, what are we doing for those 20%?
So those 20%, those are the students that are getting the tier 1 intervention in the classroom, and then now tier 2 intervention outside the classroom.
Right, but I'm concerned about the students that don't reach benchmark. You said you want 80.
I would like to see
other
80,
20?
yes.
What are we doing about the other 20 that haven't reached benchmark?
We continue to give them support based on what they need. So sometimes,
are there more intense? What I'm asking is, what are the intense interventions after third grade for these students that are really still not achieving reading?
So we have to look at why they're not achieving reading. Is there an issue with their phonics? Is there an issue with their fluency? We really have to do like a data analysis of their reading and figure out why. It also could be developmental. I mean, we don't have the prescribed program for everyone. So we have to look at the needs of each student. What we can do in school is increase the amount of intervention and increase the time, and the size of the group we would decrease. So after third grade, if a child's not reading, I would like to implement something like a Wilson program and really get those children up to benchmark at that time. I did put in for, here goes my 2 cents. I did put in for the budget to have 8 of my reading teachers trained in Wilson, which is a year-long program. And it's intensive and they do it on their own time. They don't do it during school time. And they would be trained, and that is one of the effective resources that we can use. If by third grade a child is not reading, that's something that we could implement immediately. So that's what I would like to see going forward.
Is that in our current budget?
It
is.
It is.
It is.
For everybody that it's
Oh, I was afraid to ask. Oh, I'm so happy.
Yeah.
So that was question number 7, Wilson. So you already added it to the conversation, so I don't have to. Thank you. That's really, really exciting to hear. You just made my day.
Oh.
Okay. Now, and so now I'm going to go down my favorite path everybody knows about. What do our teachers need? What professional development do our teachers need to become even stronger reading instruction? Providing stronger reading instruction.
I have to tell you, when I was a teacher, my best professional development came from my colleagues. Going into each other's classrooms and watching each other is one of the best professional development you can implement. Besides that, I would really like to push phonics and phonemic awareness in grades K to 2. I think that's something that district-wide we can use.
How do we, is there a plan for allowing our teachers to watch each other and learn from each other?
Sure. So, well, we had started inter-teacher visitations prior to COVID, and then COVID happened and put the kibosh on everything. So going forward, I would love that to happen. I mean, I'm in each classroom across the district. So if a teacher says, oh, I'd really like to learn how to implement literacy centers, like what does it look like? So in my head, I could say, oh, I know a great teacher over here. Maybe you'd like to visit them and see that. That is even more powerful than me going in and like starting it for the teacher, having them see their colleagues do it. Wait, what was I completely forgot your question.
No,
No,
you
answered it.
Oh, okay.
Let them see each other.
Yes.
Right. What professional development do our teachers need? And you answered two really, really great things.
That would be one. And like I said, the implementation of phonics and phonemic awareness, like almost direct instruction of that in our younger grades. That's something I would like to see.
I see Dr. Hines has his hand up, so I'm thinking he has more comments on this.
Well, this actually, I don't. And Victoria, thank you for answering those questions. One of the things when I meet with students at the roundtables and I ask them, what are some of the suggestions they have, what they would like to see, especially with our seniors that we just met recently, was the idea of explicit grammar instruction a little bit earlier. And I just wanted, Victoria, just to gather your thoughts about what that looks like to you, what that sounds like. And again, I hope it's not a curveball, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, because again, it's something that's surfaced a few times when I've met with students, and just want to get your general sense.
I think that's something that we could implement at a very young level. And if we start it as young as kindergarten, it'll follow through. I mean, we could get anything to teach direct instruction in grammar, phonics, and phonemic awareness. It's just coming together to get that and implement it. I think that would be phenomenal to do district-wide. I would love to see that.
All right, so we can talk more offline about that. Thanks.
Can I just jump in a little at the very beginning? Dr. Borsella showed a slide with reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language. And one of the biggest changes with Common Core was actually the addition of explicit, the re-addition, I should say, of explicit grammar instruction as part of ELA instruction. And again, as we reestablish the curriculum maps, they will be in there, even though we're in next generation standards now. It's still part of what's in there.
Can I just jump in also? I'm sorry.
Nanette,
can I just jump in, because this is kind of building in. I guess in line with what even Dr. Hines asked and what you asked earlier, Nanette, about what do we need, what do you need as far as making it better? I think, we're all very passionate about this subject, and we're excited to hear all the different things that are taking place literacy-wise. But I think coming back to our level, the board level, what we would love to be able to hear is from you, what do you need from us? And really what you need from us is in line with budgetary requests. So I think going forward, if you can maybe keep in mind the types of things that you think we need to make our program stronger district-wide, not just for intervention, but for overall. Again, in line with what Dr. Hines just asked, I think that's really what the board can do, and what the board really needs to be concentrating on is how we can help financially, ultimately, to make us a stronger program. So I'm sorry, that was all I had to say. And I know, Nanette, you've got a lot of detailed questions, but I don't have the details, just the overall.
I think it's very important for us to understand what the status is of literacy in the district and what we're building towards. I know we've been fielding a lot of community comments, especially this year. They've sort of been building to a crescendo on this topic from last year to this year. So everything that you've told us is really, really important. And I think we're all excited that there's an expansion in this year's budget. But we appreciate the information about more than just the money, because obviously from a curricular standpoint, it's important for the board to know what's going on and to be able to support the direction the district's taking. Nancy,
and Rachel, can I just add to that, boards do have very broad oversight and specific oversight in curriculum, down to even selecting programs and textbooks. That's confirmed by case law all around New York. NISBA seminars on curriculum. So I think that, not to suggest that this board wants to change how it's been handling curriculum in Port Washington, but I think it is important for us to understand what's going on at a granular level, so we can decide, if we need to encourage changes or keep supporting, what we have. And it sounds like what we have ain't so bad. So it's good for us to hear it, so that we understand that.
I think it's actually sort of analogous to the teacher freedom issue, although a little different, obviously, because I agree with what you're saying, Adam, but a smart board of education, I think, listens to their administration and their teachers who are the experts in the area. They don't say, we're going to come up with our own curriculum ourselves. But we really appreciate understanding fully what the status is, what's going to be needed financially, and the direction that we're moving and the problems that we're solving, because it helps us fulfill our oversight role too. Nan, do you have another question?
So
I do have
basically,
one
I feel like, oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
So I think my questions were oriented towards some detail and then some general, what can we as a board do to help improve our reading outcomes? So I think we were covering a lot of that. My last comment was my favorite slide was deeper dive, and I really can't wait to see you bring all of that to light. Those were really wonderful goals, and I hope that the board can help you get there. Now I'm done.
I think at this point, I'm going to go to the community comments unless Dr. Hines or Dr. Mueller, you have anything you want to jump in and add. So I see, Ms. Brassel, that you have a comment or question, and I've gone ahead and unmuted you. You should be able to speak.
Hi, thank you. I just want to say I appreciate the presentation, and I really appreciate the questions by Mr. Smith and Ms. Skilliar and Ms. Melkonian regarding literacy. I think, unfortunately, as a parent, I don't always feel like parents are heard, and to hear some of the parental concerns being spoken by board members makes me feel as if they're maybe being taken a little bit more seriously. I think the idea of an explicit grammar program would be amazing. I have a 4th grader, and when I read the work and see the missing grammar, like, grammar is my pet peeve. Like, if I have a conversation with you and you say something that's grammatically incorrect, like, I have this inner urge to want to correct you. And then just some comments that I have, we use the NWEA. We talk about using that to identify kids. And while I think the NWEA is a great tool, the one concern I have with it regarding kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade is that the test is read to the children. The children are not reading the test and decoding the words and answering the questions. The entire test is read to them. So I think a lot of times we see fairly good scores from kids. And then in 3rd grade, when we switch to reading to learn and the child is now responsible for reading the whole entire test, sometimes you see that those grades fall off. I have a question regarding Tier 3 intervention. Is Reading Recovery the only Tier 3 program that the district uses, or do we have other programs? Like, is there Tier 3 intervention for 2nd or 3rd grade? And what do we do with the child who doesn't meet the benchmarks? I heard we talked about, there's certain non-negotiables. And when you have those non-negotiables, it's like, okay, they're non-negotiable, but if they're not met, what happens? Like, there is, teachers have tenure. There is no consequence if the children leaving your classes don't meet the benchmarks. It's just like, they didn't meet them. So I have 2 pages of notes here, and obviously I can't go on with tons of questions. So I will just leave it at that.
Ms. Brassel, you know, I know you're one of the community members that have asked over the last year or so several really valid questions about literacy. So we do have a few minutes left in this meeting, and if you have questions that you want to ask, I think the administrators are happy to answer them. If you want to leave it there, that's fine too. No pressure.
Yeah, you know, this is more of just a comment, you know, like I'm so happy to hear that we're doing something, a program with kindergarten in the science of reading. I would love to see a program like that be implemented in the classroom instead of being implemented as intervention, because I think all the children in the classroom could benefit from that. You know, it's possible for 95% of children to be able to learn to read successfully. And, you know, to say that we're just looking to get to 80%, like, I don't know what, we don't have letter grades yet in 4th grade, but what's 80%? Is that like a B minus? I know Mr. Smith ran on returning excellence to Port Washington. And I think if we could get to 95%, that would be excellent. And the other, you know, something I didn't hear mentioned at all during this meeting, but I think is very relevant to literacy, is dyslexia. 1 in 5 children have dyslexia, and many of them are never even discovered. A lot of them make it all the way to high school without ever being identified. You know, I feel like this is a gray area because, you know, reading wants to say, oh, well, that's special education, but then special education says, well, we're not reading specialists. So it has this kind of gray area. You know, is there anything that we're doing from a standpoint of screening children to identify them? I just have one more thing I just have to say on reading recovery. You know, I have a note here from when my son was in reading recovery that says, "Dear Mommy, my reading recovery teacher gave me a special book today and I want to share it with you. Could I read it to you tonight? When I have trouble with a word, I'll be thinking about the story and looking at the beginning letter. I always try to make sense when I use the cues to make a good guess about the new word." Making a good guess about a word, I don't believe is a strategy of great readers, although that's what they're taught in reading recovery, and they're taught to look at the pictures. So if they look at a picture and the word is horse and they say the word pony, they are told that they are correct. They did not decode the word correctly, but because they looked at the picture and were able to find something similar, it's considered that they were correct. So when kids start to get older, like that strategy might work when you're in kindergarten or 1st grade or 2nd grade and your books have a lot of pictures in it. But once you get to the older grades and those pictures go away, like those strategies are no longer going to help somebody. So, you know, I want to instill in our children the strategies that they can use throughout their entire life, you know, not just the ones that are going to be useful in, you know, 1st and 2nd grade. So I would be a very big proponent of putting something in place that the entire district uses that's based on the science of reading. And you know what? I like that would be a huge undertaking from a budgetary standpoint. But it's something that, you know, some people felt like the undertaking of the ICT classroom was worth it. This is something, and I think that was, and I think PEP is, and I think something like this would be as well. So thank you.
If I may distill those, I think I hear 2 core questions there for Dr. Borsella. And I think one of them is, and this is my commentary, especially in light of the fact that I think that we hear and have experienced that reading recovery is life-changing for some children and the wrong fit for some children. Is that the only tier 3 program that we have, or do we have other tier 3 programs that we select for, you know, by child, to differentiate by the child? And then I think the second question that I hear in there is there coordination between the reading specialists and special ed to address dyslexia, or if there are other sort of crossover issues that impact both?
So are there other tier 3 programs? Yes, we do have lots of tier 3 programs throughout the district. What tier 3 is just the intensity and the amount of time the intervention is given. So you can use LLI as a tier 3 intervention, but then just do it one-on-one. So when we're looking at interventions, is there a canned program? Is that what you're saying across the district? No. For tier 3, no. But we do have tier 3 interventions that we use other than reading recovery. We also have something called iRead in the district. Trying to think of the other ones we have. We have Freckle. So all of these are progress monitoring and tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. And then your next question was about special ed and reading. Can you say that one more time?
Yes. Is there, so Ms. Brassel had asked about dyslexia, and I think her comment was it falls into this sort of gray area because it is a reading issue, but it's also potentially a special ed issue. And so you have reading specialists and you have special ed specialists. And I think that really what she's getting at is there coordination between those two to address some sort of crossover issue like that?
So I think this is done on a case-by-case basis based on the student's IEP. If a student has an IEP, they're usually getting addressed their needs are getting met by the special ed teacher. I understand what you're saying, that at times the special ed teacher is not a reading specialist. I completely understand that. And I think that's something that's done on a child by child, case by case basis.
Yeah, I'd like to shed some light on that answer too. I want to reiterate, and it's hard to kind of keep in the front of your head, but the whole response to intervention engine, the whole RTA engine is a pre-referral service, and especially at the early years in K through 2. So we don't tend to classify students in the early years because it's hard to, well, let me not get into that. But what the whole engine of RTI is meant to do is to identify issues and address them immediately. In the classroom if possible, outside the classroom if necessary, and to always keep having the student gravitate back towards the classroom in as good a shape as they can be. And I say that because we keep talking about, the other 20% as if there's a magic bullet where we can just, hire somebody or get a program and then, we're going to be at 90 or 100%. And they're kids, they're human beings, and there are a lot of things going on. And again, Dr. Borsella has mentioned them all. There's maturity, there's background, there's home connections, there's all the things that we've talked about in many of the other curriculum committee meetings that can lead to issues with reading and writing. And so I think it's important to understand that the IST that whole system that Dr. Borsella talked about, the instructional support team, the whole idea of that is to, when the teacher does whatever the teacher can do, they say, okay, I need help. I need to meet with my colleagues. And we talked about that as professional development. It's one of the only pieces we have built in. And they sit down with their colleagues and the colleagues say, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Did you do this? Did you do that? And all of that is documented. And if we were to find, to go back to dyslexia, if we were to find that a student was making miscues in first and second and now third grade, then we start to, and that the progress monitoring, the intervention and the progress monitoring is not making it possible for us to return that child, to the regular classroom and meet that child's needs, then that's where special ed starts saying, okay, now we start to look at those issues. Maybe there's something more going on here than just, you know, maturity or not paying attention or blah, blah, blah. So the whole process is built for that reason.
Thank you, Dr. Mioli. I know we are at 10:30, but I have two community comment hands up. Dr. Borsella and Dr. Mioli, do you mind if we go a few minutes over and just answer those?
Yeah, just a few. We have a meeting with Dr. Hines, actually.
Okay, so we'll try and really limit it to a couple minutes. Ms. Alvarez, I believe that you had your hand up first. You should be able to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you. So I know Mrs. Bursell brought it up a few different ways, but I think this is a really important topic, and I know you're already over time. I just ask, I ask that the board just really look into the resources put in, the requests put in for literacy, because it seems like one of the biggest goals as a board that you guys are really looking at the portrait of a graduate and the graduation rates in high school. And one of the biggest things is obviously early intervention and possibly no intervention needed, right? If it's done the right way from pre-K to third prior. The two things that I just noticed in this meeting was one, the drops in some of the rates around third grade, and Mrs. Bursell mentioned, mentioned that why are they not reading yet, right? There's different interventions, and some of the comments were the disability potential. Is it phonics? Is it this? I just asked that, you know, as a board, do you question also, is it the strategy given? I know that at the end of the slide, one of the things that was listed for future and some of the requests was one, being more universal as a district on what you guys are using. So if it's foundations, if it's potentially adding Wilson. Orton Gillenheim, I haven't heard been brought up at all this whole time. And I know that yes, there are a bunch of different strategies that all different districts use, but 20% is a huge number. That is a huge number that of people not hitting the benchmarks, right? Graduation, I forget what Dr. Mioli's presentation, I think it was in December, of portrait of graduate with the graduation rate is in Port Washington, but pretty sure it's pretty high, but 20% is a huge number. So as much as I know that it's a small group that needs some of the additional support, that's still a huge number. So I hope that resources are used more for literacy. And another part of that is equity. For some families who notice that their child does better with Orton, right? Hires a private tutor who knows Wilson. They have the resources able to do that. I'm very happy with my own child. My own child gets resource room, and he's probably in the bottom 20% as far as his grade level for reading. And we are very happy with our school, with Manor Haven and the level he's getting. So personally, I am very happy. The concern would be more of the students that maybe can't afford private tutors, ELL readers. So I just ask that while reading recovery maybe takes a lot of the budget that was mentioned as far as like one-on-one, I still think that it should be considered if potentially more resources and more funding going into early intervention so that you're not spending more money later on in high school for adding different roles as far as people looking at if people are failing certain classes. So thank you.
Thank you for that comment. And I think that everybody here is hearing you on that. So I'm not giving you a short shrift. I'm just looking at the clock. But I know what you've said will definitely be taken into account by everybody. Ms. Melwani, I see you have the next hand up, and you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yep, thank you. Jessica Melwani. And first, thank you to Dr. Barcella. This presentation, for me at least, was so informative and helpful and robust. So I'm really grateful for that. And, to piggyback on a couple of things that have been said, and the conversation started to be addressed, within the hour. But my question is around the data that was presented about reading proficiency in the early grades. And I fully appreciate the point that we typically look at this data over much longer periods of time, and that the data we saw today was really a snapshot in time. But as Sandra and others have mentioned, that fall off in third grade was particularly concerning, especially in light of widely reviewed and accepted research that third grade represents an inflection point with respect to literacy, and that reading proficiency at the third grade level is a leading indicator of high school graduation. So given that at this moment in time, it looks like we have 29% of third graders, or maybe now they're fourth graders or fifth graders, I can't remember when that data was taken, they're at risk. So my first question is this a trend that's common that we've seen as a district over time, which is to say that substantial progress is made through second grade and then we see a drop in third? Or is what was presented today truly just a snapshot of that 1 year and not indicative of any wider district trends? And then second, if it is a trend, if we've seen this in the past, that there's this fall off in third grade, in addition to targeting the supports at the earlier levels, at the sort of K-1, do we have any specific initiatives in the works now, post-COVID, to target those at-risk students in third grade specifically, assuming that the drop-off may be more significant in the wake of the pandemic, and given the board's reaffirmed commitment to improving graduation rates and looking at the linkage between the two?
Dr. Barcella, do you want to try and address that very, very quickly? And I have a feeling.
What do you want me to?
My major takeaway from today is that there's a lot to this subject. We probably will be revisiting it next year. And maybe when we have more data over time too, we can be talking about it in a different way, more non-COVID data. But Dr. Barcella, maybe at some point we'll also be discussing whether or not we should be asking you to come back and talk specifically about third grade and up in more detail, because I know you and Dr. Muley made the explicit decision to make this K through third because it's a very different period of time in terms of reading, and literacy overall is too big a topic, but maybe we should have you back for another meeting that targets third grade and up. But with that said, that maybe we're going to drag you back here for more detail. Do you have the, 1 or 2 minute response?
That literally was one snapshot for 1 year. I would like to look at data over time. I think that would give us a better picture of what's happening. And I think the other question was, what are we doing for our at-risk third graders? Well, I did say I just put in for trying to get Wilson training, which would be a tier 2 and tier 3 intervention for our third through 6th graders. Actually, I believe the level 1 certification is third grade through 8th grade. They would be trained in. So that's one intervention I thought that we could bring into the district to help our third graders who are not reading. And that's something that's very intensive and specific to trying to get them to benchmark.
Thank you all. Dr. Mealy, I don't know if you have something you want to add to wrap things up, or wrap things up as much as we can, because I know that there's.
Yeah, I think I do. I think this discussion, as I said about curriculum mapping, the curriculum maps are important. The mapping, the discussion is just as important for the teachers. I think this kind of discussion is very important for us and for educators. In my favorite department.
None for nothing.
Not for nothing department.
Not for nothing department. Okay, at least that's clear. Victoria used to be 2 people not too long ago. And it took us, I can tell you, Elena Jello, my first assistant principal at Sousa 23 years ago, spoke about the importance of literacy coaches. And it took us about 18 years to get 1 and then 2, and we're back to 1 again. So just saying, she's been, very, very crucial in helping get what we are getting done now. The only other thing I want to say, and it's not to sugarcoat, but just to end on a positive note, that at the last curriculum meeting, when we were going through all of these standardized tests, I took a minute to just highlight how at the middle school and high school level, we have 2 tests that literally or virtually every student takes in 8th and in 10th grade in English. And we have a fantastically high, I don't remember what it was, I think it was 98 or 99%, success rate there. And I made the comment then, because I knew this was coming, that although we need to look at this and we need to take it seriously, and there are a lot of issues that we can do better with, we don't have a crisis in terms of our kids getting what they need in English and English language arts. We do have issues that we need to look at, and we are starting to, and we need to do more of. And those are that in that middle space, I think there's a lot that we can talk about and a lot that we can do.
Dr. Miele, what's that test for 8th and 10th graders? I'm not.
There's a Regents, Dr. Pernick, you want to help me out here? I don't have it in front of me.
Grade 11, but it is the ELA Regents.
Okay. I thought I was really like brand new to the.
Sorry.
So, okay.
Thank you,
Dr.
11, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Miele and Dr. Borsella, for bringing us your expertise this morning and packing really an amazing amount of education for all of us on this area into a relatively short meeting, given the amount of content. We really appreciate all your hard work on this. And hopefully we'll see you again in the future for some more details on some of the rest of this. Thank you everyone for attending the meeting.
Thank you.
And
Thank
we'll see everyone tomorrow night at the Board of Ed meeting.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.